Describe the process of digestion of proteins in stomach. So students, now in the previous question we learnt about protein digestion in small intestine. Now let us learn about the digestion of proteins in the stomach. So the digestion of proteins begins in the stomach and then it continues in the small intestine. So the final digestion occurs in the small intestine, but the initial digestion occurs in the stomach. So let us learn about the initial digestion in the stomach. Now the stomach secretes gastric juice. So here we can see the stomach has got gastric glands. So this is a gastric gland and this gastric gland secretes a juice called gastric juice. Now this gastric juice is released in the lumen of the stomach. Once the food enters the stomach, the gastric juice mixes with the food and makes it acidic. So the food becomes acidic on mixing with the gastric juice. Now let us see what is present in the gastric juice that makes it acidic. Now the gastric juice contains a hydrochloric acid, HCl. So this HCl creates the acidic medium. It makes the gastric juice acidic and the pH will be around 2. Along with the gastric juice, it has got pepsinogen, mucus and renin. So here we can see the gastric gland. So the gastric gland in that parietal cells produces HCl and the sheath cells produces the enzymes pepsinogen. So once the gastric juice is released, the HCl acts upon the pepsinogen and converts it into its active form pepsin. Now this pepsin is a protein digesting enzyme. It is required for the digestion of the proteins. So generally it is present in the inactive form, that is pepsinogen, but once it mixes with the hydrochloric acid, it gets converted into its active form, that is pepsin. And the pepsin acts upon protein and converts it, breaks it into peptides. So they are called as proteases and peptides. So peptides are nothing but short chain of amino acids. Now along with that, the gastric juice contains another enzyme called renin. So this renin is also activated by the HCl. It is present in the inactive form called prorenin. On mixing with HCl, it becomes activated called renin. Now this renin is required for the digestion of the proteins present in the milk. So generally, the milk contains proteins which is in a soluble form. Now the soluble proteins cannot be digested by the enzyme pepsin. So it should be made into insoluble form. And that insoluble protein is formed by the action of renin. So renin acts upon the protein and it coagulates the proteins. It makes the protein to stick to one another and bind. So once it stick to one another and bind, this soluble proteins becomes insoluble. And this insoluble protein will be acted upon by pepsin. So pepsin further breaks this proteins present in the milk and convert them into proteases and peptones. But without coagulation, the pepsin directly cannot act upon the proteins. So to make it insoluble, renin is required. So the digestion process begins in the stomach. Stomach has got two enzymes, renin and pepsin. So pepsin helps in the digestion of protein. Renin helps in the digestion of proteins present in the milk. It converts the soluble proteins in the milk into insoluble form so that pepsin can act upon it.